Ukraine has released their Flamingo missile, and they have actually conducted their first successful strike. But this strike will not be the only strike, not by any means. And in fact, this missile could be the very thing that will win Ukraine the war. And that is not an exaggeration when you look at how they are being used and how they can be used in the near future. Already to this point in the war, Russia has had an increasingly hard time dealing with Ukraine's long-range strike capabilities, all of which have been homegrown by Ukraine because their partner nations have not allowed them to use long-range weapons against targets on Russian territory. And these long-range strikes that have frustrated Russia so much have primarily been done by drones, which can carry only light payloads and are only capable of doing so much damage. Nevertheless, Ukraine's usage of drones alone has already been absolutely devastating to Russia, as they've been able to take out targets ranging from Russian oil refineries to oil storage depots to other types of energy facilities, to rail depots, to ammo depots, you name it. There is a broad range of targets all across the board, deep within Russia, that already Ukraine has been able to hit, basically, with abandon. And now we see them increasing their strikes against those targets, hitting the same targets not just once, but multiple times again and again and again and again, showing that they are actually making a concerted effort at taking facilities offline, and also showing that Russian air defenses just have too many holes in them to adequately deal with the threat of Ukrainian air attacks. Almost entirely with drones, we have seen Ukraine be so effective just this year that they have effectively neutralized Russian offensives along the front line. Basically, because Russian soldiers could not get adequate supplies due to constant drone strikes on their logistics, with so many rail lines and rail hubs and combat vehicles being hit that they could not get supplies to Russian soldiers. No food, no ammunition, no fuel means no offensive, no pushing forward. And on top of that, we have also seen Ukraine be so effective with drones just this year that right now there are actually gasoline shortages in many regions of Russia. And this is a country that basically does nothing but produce oil and gas. And we have seen this happen because Ukraine has been striking so many Russian oil refineries just with drones that they cannot keep up against the pressure. And it is against this backdrop that we are now seeing the Flamingo cruise missile enter the mix. As we dive in, if you appreciate this type of analysis, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Both of those things are completely free, but they help me out a lot. And if you'd like to support the channel more, please also consider becoming a patron or a YouTube channel member. You can learn more about both of those things via links in the description. With the Flamingo cruise missiles, Ukraine will be able to enhance their ability to strike Russia by a magnitude that, honestly, it's kind of hard to quantify. Because these cruise missiles will not only be able to strike deeper within Russia, but they'll also be able to move much faster than Ukrainian drones do, making them much harder to intercept. And on top of that, these cruise missiles can carry a much higher payload, a payload of up to 1 ton, allowing them to take out entire Russian facilities, often with a single missile, something that would take dozens, if not hundreds, of drones to accomplish. And so when we consider the damage that the drones have been able to do, the Flamingos really must have the Russian military, and especially Vladimir Putin, in a complete panic. However, while all those details might look significant enough on the surface, it turns out that as we dive deeper into each of those aspects, and what specifically each of them unlocks, we can really see clearly how the Flamingo cruise missile is Russia's worst nightmare. And that's perhaps the most apparent when we look at the range of the Flamingo cruise missile, which is over 3,000 kilometers, which is large enough to hit every Russian target west of the Ural Mountains, which is the majority of the populated part of the Russian country. And specifically, the Flamingo cruise missile now has Ukraine within their range the ability to hit 70 out of 90 Russian air bases and over 120 different oil and gas facilities just with this missile. There's a couple of different aspects to why this is significant. First, there's obviously the ability of Ukraine to actually strike these targets and take them out. But there's also the other aspect where just Ukraine having the theoretical ability to hit all of these different targets is going to force the Russian military to start behaving differently today, even before Ukraine actually strikes anything. We know this, for example, when we look at the early stages of the war and how Russia positioned their aircraft versus how Russia positioned their aircraft after Ukraine got permission to strike deeper within Russia using Western missiles that had a much shorter range than the Flamingo does. Early on in the war, Russia positioned all of their aircraft really close to the front lines because basically Ukraine had no ability to strike them without getting in major trouble with their Western suppliers. And this allowed Russia to conduct a lot more assaults with those aircraft because they were so close to the Ukrainian borders. And it allowed Russia to do it at a much lower cost because obviously not having to fly as far means that the aircraft did not have to use nearly as much fuel. Then when Ukraine got the ability, the permission to strike those air bases that were doing that, Russia was forced to move all of their aircraft much deeper within Russia, which immediately lowered the amount of strikes that they were able to conduct against Ukraine and raised the cost. Now that equation is about to get magnitudes worse because the Flamingo missile can hit pretty much all of the air bases that Russia is actively using today, which means that Russia is going to have to relocate, if they haven't already, most of their aircraft far deeper within Russia, immediately reducing their ability to actually conduct aerial assaults on Ukraine. Now, I don't actually know the capacity of all of these different air bases, but my assumption is that the 20 remaining Russian air bases that are out of range of the Flamingo missile will not have enough capacity to actually carry all of the aircraft coming from the other Russian air bases, which means that no matter what, a large portion of Russian aircraft are going to be vulnerable. And that plays into the second aspect of how just the existence of the Flamingo missile, even if it's not striking, affects Russian strategy. Because with all of this vast variety and quantity of targets now within range of this missile, Russia is going to have to think differently about how they position their aerial defenses, which they already don't have enough of. Basically, Russia is going to have to choose to protect certain targets and leave certain targets within Russia undefended, and that is going to not only stretch Russia's air defenses more thinly than they already are, but it's also going to mean Ukraine has the ability to hit a lot more targets a lot more freely, not only making it easier to hit targets with the Flamingo missiles, but also making it easier to hit other targets with their drones, as they already have been. Already today, we've seen there are massive gaps in Russian air defenses, which is why Ukraine keeps getting through. And now those gaps are only going to get bigger, which means the Flamingo can do its job, but the drones can also do their job even better as well. So that's the range side of the equation, and when we look at it carefully, you realize that it's not just a progressive unlock for Ukraine, it's actually an exponential unlock, where the Flamingo not only unlocks new things for them, but it also allows them to do the things they were already doing far better. And the same thing is true when we look at the payload of the Flamingo cruise missile and what that's going to unlock for Ukraine. First and foremost, there's the obvious fact that a higher payload on a cruise missile versus a drone unlocks new categories of facilities that Ukraine can actually strike, playing into that side of the equation that I already mentioned. But also because the payload is so much larger, it means that Ukraine can strike the facilities they have currently been striking much more fiercely and destroy them much more thoroughly and much more permanently. This itself is also highly significant. Let's make the assumption, which certainly won't be true, but it helps just to explain the impact. Let's make the assumption that the Flamingo cruise missiles are only used to strike Russian refineries that Ukraine has been striking with drones. When we look at that equation, we realize that with drone strikes on refineries, Russia has had refineries be offline from weeks to months at a time, with the offline periods getting longer the further we get because they don't have enough parts and they don't have enough technicians to keep up with it. Once you factor in the Flamingo and the fact that the damage can be much more thorough and take much longer to recover from, you realize that this has an exponential impact where far more Russian refineries will be offline at the same time, something we also already see with Ukrainian drones. And with far more refineries offline at the same time, that not only means Russia has less refining capacity overall, but it also means each incremental piece of refining capacity is harder to recover from, because the country only has so many spare parts, the country only has so many technicians, and with the combination of the Flamingo striking really hard and the drones striking really frequently and all over the place, you will see Russia at a point where there are far more refineries destroyed than they can actually handle, which will make their refining problem incrementally and then exponentially worse because these new missiles are now in the equation. Now, currently, Ukraine says they can produce 1 Flamingo cruise missile per day, but that is going to be ramped up to 7 per day by the end of October. In my opinion, that means they probably have multiple facilities coming online, and that's probably why they've been willing to kind of advertise the fact that they have this capability now. And these facilities are probably all underground, and Russia probably has no capability to actually take them out. When you consider this capacity, 7 per day, 210 per month, in a 30-day month, that means Ukraine will have more than enough Flamingo cruise missiles each and every month to strike every single Russian refinery, even accounting for the number of them that will likely be intercepted by Russian air defenses. Not only that, but because Ukraine can definitely produce more Flamingo cruise missiles faster than Russia can repair facilities, it means that Russia will effectively have no ability to recover from this while they remain at war, which has got to be Ukraine's main goal. Paralyze the Russian economy to force Russia into negotiating and ending their war. No Western sanctions needed, no massive concessions needed. Ukraine is applying their own kinetic sanctions to do what Western governments have been unwilling and unable to do. There are other categories of targets, though, that we can still consider. For example, there is the Kerch Strait Bridge, which connects Crimea to mainland Russia. With these cruise missiles, Ukraine will have the ability to strike this bridge at a time of their choosing, with enough force to actually take the bridge out. And whether or not they actually do this soon, their mere ability to do this will change the calculus for Russia. We see Ukraine at least trying to seed this idea in the minds of the Russians on Crimea, as Ukraine recently, around the time of announcing the launch of the Flamingo cruise missile, has been taking out air defenses around Crimea all over again. Basically trying to make the people on Crimea terrified that if they don't leave Crimea soon, they may never have another chance. Some people assess that Ukraine's strategy here might be to take out the Kerch Strait Bridge as soon as possible, basically making Crimea a very chaotic place that Russia now has to deal with. Something that will be very embarrassing, something that will distract Russia and detract from their overall war effort. And that is a real possibility. I think it is less likely, though, than another possibility. My personal assessment is that I think Ukraine wants the Russians who are living on Crimea to have the fear that someday soon they might not be able to leave the peninsula. And Ukraine wants to use this fear to actually start clearing the Crimean Peninsula of the Russian population that Russia moved on to Crimea after they annexed it from Ukraine. A lot of people know that after Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine, they relocated a lot of Russian citizens there, basically to make it a humanitarian crisis if Ukraine ever takes this territory back. And it really is a really difficult situation to handle. However, if Ukraine demonstrates to these citizens that at any time they can destroy this Kerch Strait Bridge that is connecting them to their mainland, making it so that the only way for them to get back to their homeland is to go through the battle-torn regions that Russia has recently taken from Ukraine, these citizens might be inclined to start their exodus sooner rather than later, a kind of get out while you can scenario. And I think personally that Ukraine is going to be able to make that happen because of this new cruise missile. Whatever the case, when we look across the board, though, we see that this new cruise missile doesn't just give Ukraine military options. It also helps to reduce the strength of Russia without Ukraine having to actually do anything, forcing Russia to move things around, to relocate, to vacate certain positions before Ukraine can destroy them. This means that just the psychological presence and existence of the weapon has an impact all on its own. And I think Ukraine is likely to use the missile in a number of ways in response to the way that they see Russia reacting. They have a number of different targets to choose from. They can be patient and choose the targets that are the least offended and the most impactful. Russia, for their part, has a dilemma. They can make choices to reduce the impact of the Flamingo in certain areas, but by doing so, they will increase the impact of the Flamingo in other areas. And they are left with no good options, just some that are slightly better than alternatives. Thank you so much for watching. Before you go, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Both of those things are completely free, but they help the channel out a lot. And if you'd like to support the channel more, there are a number of ways to do so via links in the description. I don't expect paid support from anybody, but it really does help impact what I'm able to do and helps me get out more content more frequently at a higher quality for you guys. So thank you so much for all that you guys do. Be sure to check out one of these videos on screen to learn more.